So in this video, I'm just kind of thinking about ways to lay in and understand the knee. Occasionally I'll get kind of interested in an area that has a complexity to it, and then have some fun seeing if I could figure out some architectural solutions that might be easier for me to remember more consistently and design. In the beginning of this, I'm laying the upper and lower leg in, just as basic tubes or cylinders. I'm looking at the direction as gesture first, and then the three-dimensional aspects on top. What I did at the top of the lower leg, or the knee, is that I found the two landmark points across the medial and lateral epicondyle. So just the bony landmarks of the knee, and use that to define a front plane. So I cut into the cylinder with that straight. Cylinder is easier to set up for me, and then I'll go into the planes based on those landmarks. Then I'll just drop that depth back near where that arrow is. From those two dots, I've dropped a couple of gesture lines inside the shape of the lower leg to help plane the lower leg into a side and a front. And then those always continue as a long C or S curve down into the foot, where I'm developing the kind of dynamic sock shape. I'm drawing here from bodiesinmotion.photo, which is one of my favorite references to work from. And I especially chose these because I think that those are really unique and clear anatomical shapes and forms around this model's leg. The back of the leg I usually treat with an S, and then I'll kind of cradle the higher peak of that curve in the S to the calf to express the height of the calf, and then try to offset that against a more sheer, almost straighter line in the front of the shin, just to create that, off balance or asymmetrical effect. And then this is what I've been thinking more about lately, is just how can we start to see the knee maybe as a simple cube based on the landmarks. So the medial lateral epicondyle, and then I'm trying to track that down to the plateau of the tibia. And then I center on that plane based on where the symmetry line would be a patella shape. And then I've been playing around lately with expanding that shape into planes that might more easily represent the difficult turns and kind of anatomical forms around the knee. The knee is it's so complicated with the bones pushing, the soft tissue, the muscle, the ligaments, the patellar fat, right? All of that stuff is, I usually feel like I get pretty confused, and I'll see students get confused as well. So this is taking that patella shape and then just throwing the lines from those outer corners up and then down. That would be to the tibial tuberosity, where the little circle or oval shape is. And then I'm thinking of this as a knee cap. So I started with that block just to plane the knee, and then I'm capping it with this shield. So I think of it like Legend of Zelda shield, or it almost kind of looks like the umbrella logo from Resident Evil. Not really, but kind of. And then from there, it's a little bit easier to remember and kind of make sense of the designs around the knee. And I always do this in layers, so once I have a rough end, then I'll maybe come back and start to look at some of the muscle shapes around it. And the benefit of the shield is it gives me, even though it's a more precise perspective, it gives me the planes that I could notch some of the anatomical shapes into. So maybe on that inside, the vastus lateralis would sit, and then maybe just in that top, that's where the tendon would go from the patella to the quadricep. And then maybe on that outside edge could be where the lateral quadricep goes. So I'm kind of thinking about this shape or this design as something that could simplify the difficult geographies of the knee, but then also, if you're able to work it through, it might help set one up for an easier placement or deciphering of where like the confusing anatomical forms are. So that would be thinking about the sartorius, kind of just bringing that down into the lower leg. Those points at the bottom, I'm thinking of like that triangular or the tapering form or the arrow to the oval would be the tapering of the tibia from the plateau down into the shaft of the bone. But the goal is to not need to know that and have a nice design that might work for you that could still say, an adequate amount about the muscle and the bone, but not require that you have to go through all of the difficulty of learning it and breaking it down. And then here I'm trying to wrap behind the big shape of the lower leg, the calf. So I'm trying to keep that outer shape a little bit higher, and then the perspective contours. So that line I'm thinking of is the bone, the tibia, and then the calf, still seen from the front, but creating the width of the leg or the silhouette of the leg, and then separating the muscles of the calf. You can see my approach is always kind of laying a shape in, orienting it to the larger perspectives, and then I like to do a lot of those perspective lines or hatching just to start to carve out surface and try to understand surface. So there I'm trying to think about the side of the tibia. So like when I look at the reference, there's a slight crest light on the inside of that bone, and then it turns into shadow. And then if you go the other way, there's a shadow for the calf and then a light side for the calf. It's the top versus the top of the tarsus versus the perspective change into the metatarsus for the foot or the arch of the foot. So here I'm just building that out with a perspective, thinking about how those planes might suggest weight for that foot as it makes contact with the ground. Then after this, I was interested in if it would be possible to kind of utilize the same kind of shape. See, like I'm kind of laying my leg there, but use the same shape for the patella or the ideas around that to try different views. So I do this a lot when I'm kind of thinking about new ways to draw something or design something. I usually have, like the key that I showed in the top right that I shared as a separate illustration. And then I'll just do like laboratory experiments to see if we can make it work from different angles, or if the idea holds in different angles, and if it's still useful or if it's just more trouble. So in this, I'm doing the same thing with the gesture. I'm laying in a basic tube or design, and then those points are referencing landmarks. And those landmark points help me plane the cylinder into a box. So there's a top and a side, and then I'm creating the continuity between upper and lower leg here with gesture and overlap. So there's, I always find that this is a hard thing around the knee, even for me, is getting the consistent transition, so it doesn't feel like it's broken or there's too much space. So I'm pulling off those same points of landmark, the planes, from the top down into the foot. That way I don't really have to think about them as separate. If I can find those points on the upper leg, I just use them as gesture leads into the lower, and then I think it creates a greater feeling of continuity, or maybe like a little more graceful. And the lower leg, you can see I did the same thing. The front of the leg is a longer gesture line that feels sharper. The back of the lower leg's design is always like an S curve with that peak higher. Now I'm referencing the points around the knee to get that plane that I'm going to later build the patella shape onto. Follow that line down, and that gives me the whole front plane as it leads down the shin and into the top of the foot. And again start to work with that same process of layering the patella shape foreshortened for the line of symmetry of the lower leg onto the front plane of where I'm seeing the knee. And then from there, and designing my little shield with the top, corners, sides, and then point, and then broadening that into something that could give a more compelling or realistic feeling shape to edit out the difficulty around the knee area. So again, the bottom portion is a summary of the plateau of the tibia, and then the transition from that into the tibial tuberosity, and the little stretched box that would be at the bottom of the patella down to the bottom of the triangle is the patellar ligament. And then here I'm making like a little softener plane so that the knee doesn't have to be such a severe box. This one I was just experimenting with pulling the same points from that kneecap up to see if it would give it a slightly more planed, something a little bit softer than a box. Like I just chopped that outside edge of the box down a little bit. So this would be my top, my side, a little of a cut in between those so that it's not such a hard corner. I'm trying to create some kind of rhythm and design in that too, so that it can create a nice feeling of movement that might pull into that corner of the lower leg. Here I'm thinking more about the calf shape, trying to think about the 2D shape, how it sits on top of what the lower leg is designed to be in terms of space, and then how does it contribute its own sense of sculptural three-dimensional quality in addition to or on top of that. So it's kind of like building up the big planed lower leg and then stacking some little baby shapes on top. There I'm just thinking about skin folds, a little pinch between the upper and lower leg to soften that area. And then the other side of that calf, or the extensor maybe. Justus medialis. And I'm thinking about the shapes of the quadriceps for the same qualities. And just wondering if my little shield design, or the shield design, I don't own it, it's not mine, but if it would help me think about how to put the muscles in the proper arrangement based on those planes and seeing those planes.